My family who came here in the 1800s from Norway and Germany, that they spoke Norwegian and German.
Okay.
And really what she did is prove that my family came here legally. But
Sunny Hostin just got verbally body slammed by Tomi Lahren so hard, CNN...
She doesn't even know her own history. She certainly doesn't know this country's history.
well, there is a woman over the weekend who took it upon herself to research my family history in hopes of digging up some kind of a gotcha moment, a gotcha angle to validate illegal immigration and open borders. And what she found was really shocking, guys. She found that
Second great-grandmother had been here for 10 years, yet spoke no English. Oh my gosh. 1930 census says Tommy's 3 times great-grandmother had been here for 41 years and still spoke German. She didn't speak English either.
So what exactly happened here? In what I consider one of the most predictable yet entertaining media moments of recent times, Megyn Kelly and Bill Maher essentially took The View to task without even sitting at their infamous table. I've watched The View on and off for years, and I've always thought it was more about entertainment than substance. But what Kelly and Maher did, in my opinion, was expose this reality in a way that was impossible to ignore. You know what's funny to me? The View calls itself The View, but from my perspective, it's often just one view repeated 5 different ways. And apparently, I'm not the only one who thinks so. I actually keep a little notebook where I track predictions about media controversies, call it a weird hobby. And I literally wrote, The View will clash with Kelly or Maher in 2025 inches back in January. The tension has been building for years, and I'm not surprised it finally boiled over. What fascinates me personally is how this conflict represents something much bigger than just a media spat. I believe it symbolizes the growing divide between old-school liberalism that values open debate and the newer variety that sometimes seems more concerned with ideological conformity. As someone who considers themselves politically independent, I find these tensions within political movements just as interesting as the conflicts between them.
But what she was hoping to do was try to call me a hypocrite for believing in merit-based immigration. Again, she failed miserably. But this really isn't what she calls resistance genealogy. It's just another indication of Trump derangement syndrome.
But
I really am happy, though, that she has such a fascination with my family history, and I'm hoping that she will take on Elizabeth Warren's next.
wow,
There's this moment that really stuck with me where Bill Maher points out, it's called The View. It's not called The Facts. I literally stood up and applauded when I heard this. I've been saying this for years to anyone who would listen. In my view, this perfectly encapsulates the fundamental issue with shows like The View. They present opinions as facts and emotions as evidence. What I find most problematic is how the show positions itself as a place for diverse perspectives, when, from what I've observed, it often just amplifies a particular worldview. I remember watching an episode during the pandemic where one of the hosts made a scientific claim that I knew was completely incorrect. I have a background in public health, so this is an area I know something about. What bothered me wasn't just the error, but the absolute certainty with which it was presented. No qualifiers, no in my opinion, just stated as irrefutable fact. This distinction between views and facts matters deeply to me because I believe it's at the heart of our deteriorating public discourse. We've somehow arrived at a place where strong feelings are treated as equivalent to expertise, where lived experience, while valuable, is considered the ultimate authority on complex systemic issues. I think Maher's quip highlights a problem that extends far beyond just The View. It's about our entire media ecosystem and how we've blurred the lines between opinion and fact. But The View is perhaps one of the clearest examples of this phenomenon, which is why Maher's criticism landed so effectively. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting opinions don't have value. Of course they do. But when I tune into a show that purports to offer multiple perspectives, I expect those perspectives to be clearly framed as such, not delivered as unchallenged gospel truth.
From Sunny Hostin. Sounds like a town. We're in Sunny Hostin. She was on PBS's Finding Your Roots, a show dedicated to researching celebrity ancestry. For context, Sunny is a staunch supporter of reparations and has made a fortune spewing nonsense about white privilege and racial justice. Well, turns out she's not as oppressed as she claims she is. She's actually the descendant of slave owners from Europe.
What fascinates me about both Kelly and Maher is that despite their vastly different political backgrounds, they share something I deeply value: intellectual consistency, and a willingness to challenge orthodoxy, even when it's unpopular. I believe this is what makes their criticism so devastating. They're not attacking from a purely partisan angle. They're critiquing the format, the approach, and what I would call the intellectual dishonesty that sometimes pervades daytime talk shows. In my experience as a content creator, nothing is more powerful than authentic dialogue where people actually listen to each other. That's what I strive for on this channel, and what I think The View often lacks. I've spent the last 3 years studying different communication styles for a series I'm developing, and one pattern I've observed is that the most effective communicators aren't necessarily those who speak the loudest or have the snappiest comebacks. They're the ones who genuinely engage with opposing ideas before responding to them. Let me tell you about an experiment I conducted on my channel last year. I invited 2 guests with completely opposing political views to discuss a controversial topic. The only rule was that before responding to each other, they had to accurately summarize the other person's position to that person's satisfaction. The result was one of the most enlightening conversations I've ever hosted. Viewers from both political sides commented that they finally felt heard rather than caricatured. This is precisely what I think The View misses in its approach, and what Kelly and Maher understand instinctively. Real dialogue requires intellectual charity, the willingness to engage with the strongest version of your opponent's argument, not the weakest.
DNA, 23andMe, because I cannot believe the detail on your background that they were able to get.
Well, I don't have to. She did all the research for me, so I'm sure my family is very appreciative.
What about Joy saying, though, what are your skills? It's beyond research. It is personal. It is mean.
Well, of course, this is classical Joy Behar, but I would like to ask Joy Behar what her skills are, because perhaps we could swap stories. I know I watch Joy, and she seems like a highly skilled lady, but for her to attack me, that's really interesting. Those in glass houses should not throw stones.
Let me be straight with you. I've always found The View's format frustrating. It's supposed to be this round table of diverse perspectives, but in my opinion, it often devolves into what I can only describe as performative disagreement. I've noticed that there's rarely enough time to develop an actual argument before someone interrupts with a quip or the conversation gets redirected. And don't even get me started on those moments when a host clearly just learned about a topic minutes before going live. What drives me crazy is watching complex issues get reduced to simplistic talking points that can fit between commercial breaks. I believe viewers deserve more substance than that. Look, I watch a lot of talk shows for research, and yes, occasionally for pure entertainment. And what bothers me specifically about The View is how it pretends to be something it's not. I remember watching an episode last year where they were discussing a complex economic policy, and I was stunned by how quickly they reduced it to emotional sound bites. I actually yelled at my TV, "That's not how economics works." My dog thought I was losing it. In my view, this format creates a dangerous illusion of being informed when you're really just being entertained. It's like eating cotton candy when you need protein. It might taste good in the moment, but it's not giving you what you actually need.
About you that bothers them so much.
Well, it's not just me, it's anybody who advocates for merit-based immigration or has an issue with open borders. And again, just like you said, they don't seem to understand that we on the right believe in immigration. We understand that we are a nation of immigrants, and I am proud of my heritage. However, I do believe that the immigration crisis of today is apples to oranges from what it was in the 1800s when immigrants came to this country legally, were documented, worked for themselves, asked for nothing, and built a life and a family. That has nothing to do with the illegal immigration crisis of today that we must deal with. But they don't want to acknowledge that whatsoever.
From my perspective, The View has become almost a caricature of itself over the years. I've watched enough episodes to recognize the patterns. Each host seems locked into a particular role. Joy Behar, who I actually find pretty funny sometimes, approaches nearly every topic with the same level of indignation. Sunny Hostin, while clearly intelligent, often presents her legal background as though it makes her the final authority on every subject. I've always felt that Alyssa Farah Griffin has the thankless job of being the token conservative voice in a room that doesn't really want to hear conservative viewpoints. And then there's Whoopi Goldberg. I've been a fan of her acting for decades, but as a moderator, I find it perplexing how often she seems disengaged from the very conversations she's supposed to be guiding. What frustrates me most is watching how these dynamics play out when they tackle topics I know well. Last month, they discussed a tech policy issue that's directly related to my previous career, and I was genuinely shocked by how confidently incorrect some of the hosts were. It reminded me of that Mark Twain quote, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so." To be fair, I understand the constraints of the format. They're trying to cover complex topics in short segments between commercials. But I believe this is precisely why the show should be more humble about the limitations of its format instead of presenting opinions as definitive truth. I've worked in television production, and I know firsthand the pressure to simplify and dramatize. But at some point, that simplification becomes misleading, and that's where I think The View often crosses the line.
I'm a little bit in shock. I just always thought of myself as Puerto Rican, half Puerto Rican. I didn't think I was, my family was originally from Spain and slaveholders.
Yeah. So how are you feeling, my friend?
I think it's actually pretty interesting that my husband and I have shared roots.
Yeah.
And it is funny. She's so wrapped up in identity, and she had no idea who she was.
What I admire about Megyn Kelly's criticism, and this is coming from someone who doesn't agree with her on many political issues, is her delivery. In my observation, she doesn't need to yell or interrupt to make her point stick. I think Kelly's background as a lawyer and experienced journalist gives her this unique ability to calmly dissect arguments in a way that's both precise and devastating. She points out what I consider the most glaring issue with The View. It masquerades as a place for debate when it's really more of an echo chamber with occasional token disagreement. The silence from The View in response to her criticisms speaks volumes to me. In my experience, when someone has no rebuttal, it's often because the criticism hit too close to home. I've studied communication styles for years as part of my work, and Kelly exemplifies what I call controlled precision. There was this one clip where she systematically broke down a particularly ridiculous segment from The View, and I was genuinely impressed. I remember thinking, this is exactly how you dismantle bad arguments. She doesn't rely on cheap shots or personal attacks. She simply exposes the logical fallacies and inconsistencies. What frustrates me is that in today's media landscape, this kind of methodical approach is rare. We've become so accustomed to emotional appeals and shouting matches that when someone like Kelly comes along with actual reasoned arguments, it feels almost revolutionary. I believe this speaks to how low the bar has fallen for public discourse, and that's something that genuinely concerns me about where we're headed as a society.
During the Obama years, it was a cattle call to come into this nation illegally. And furthermore, this is again the left's attempt at emotional blackmail. And I would just like to state, I don't know if they understand this or not, but if you don't want your family to be broken up when you cross the border illegally, here's an idea. Don't cross the border illegally. Then your family will surely stay together. I don't know why the left can't think of this, but they would rather try to tell us that we hate families, we want to break up families, we're horrible, we're despicable. No, we want to enforce federal immigration law.
Now let's talk about Bill Maher. I've followed his career for years, and what I value about him is his willingness to criticize both sides of the political spectrum. In today's hyper-partisan media landscape, I find that incredibly refreshing. What strikes me as significant is that Maher isn't some right-wing culture warrior. He's a liberal who's simply grown frustrated with what he perceives as intellectual dishonesty from his own side. I can relate to that frustration when I see genuine debate replaced by performative outrage. I believe Maher nailed it when he criticized The View's approach to guests with different opinions. I've watched countless episodes where guests who deviate even slightly from the prevailing view get talked over or dismissed. From my perspective, that's not dialogue, it's theater. This reminds me of something that happened to me at a dinner party last year. I expressed an opinion that wasn't aligned with the majority of the group, and suddenly it was like I'd committed some cardinal sin. The conversation became awkward, people started talking over me, and eventually, the host changed the subject entirely. It was such a clear example of how uncomfortable we've become with disagreement. What I appreciate about Maher, despite not always agreeing with him, is that he seems genuinely interested in the exchange of ideas rather than the performance of righteousness. I've noticed that when he has guests on his show, he actually listens to them, even when he strongly disagrees. That's becoming increasingly rare in our media landscape, and I think it's something we should value regardless of political affiliation. In my view, The View could learn something important from this approach. Real conversations require actual listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak or looking for the perfect moment to deliver a zinger that will go viral.
Why do you think you've resonated with so many people?
I think, in large part, I represent middle America. So you've got the two coasts, and those individuals seem to kind of just talk to each other. And then you've got all of middle America right there that's dying to have a voice. They don't really feel like they have one. They're not represented, beyond their communities. So I think they watch me and they say, well, she speaks like I do. She thinks like I do. She seems to maybe get it like I do. And I think that's why it's resonated. And also, I do something very different. There's not a whole lot of young conservative women out there. And so I provide that for a lot of young women.
What I find most interesting about this whole situation is that neither Kelly nor Maher needed to be physically present to deliver their critiques. They commented from afar, and in my opinion, that made their points even more powerful. I've always believed that the strongest criticisms are those that can stand on their own merits, without the drama of confrontation. And it seems to me that Kelly and Maher understand this perfectly. You know what's truly revealing to me? The fact that The View continues to draw viewers despite these criticisms. I think this speaks to our collective fascination with conflict and drama, even when it comes at the expense of substance. I'm guilty of it too sometimes. There's something undeniably compelling about watching heated exchanges, even when they generate more heat than light. I actually tried an experiment last month. I forced myself to watch The View every day for a week, taking notes on how many substantive points were made versus how many emotional reactions were showcased. The results were pretty eye-opening. I counted an average of 3 emotional outbursts for every one substantive point, and even those substantive points were often just restating talking points I'd heard elsewhere. What this tells me is that The View isn't really designed for information, it's designed for affirmation. It's comfort food television for people who want to feel that their existing views are correct. And honestly, I get the appeal. In a complicated world, there's something soothing about watching people who share your perspective express outrage on your behalf. But I worry about what this does to our ability to engage with ideas that challenge us. I genuinely believe we're losing that muscle as a society.
We keep on talking about criminals and immigrants being criminals. And I just want people to understand what the facts are and the stats are, is that undocumented immigrants are much less likely to have committed crimes than American citizens. American citizens commit more crimes than anyone who's undocumented. I also want to make the point that an undocumented immigrant is not a criminal because he or she is undocumented. That is a civil offense. So to call people illegals is in and of itself, I think, xenophobic and racist.
What resonated with me most about Kelly's criticism was her breakdown of The View's formula. I've often thought that volume is mistaken for validity on shows like this, and Kelly articulated this perfectly. From my perspective, The View sells itself as a forum for women's empowerment, but I've always found it troubling how quickly that empowerment seems to vanish when a woman expresses an unpopular opinion. As for Maher, I appreciate how he uses humor as a tool for insight rather than just for laughs. In my view, his ability to expose contradictions through comedy is far more effective than direct confrontation would be. I'm particularly sensitive to this issue because I've been on both sides of it. Early in my career, I worked briefly as a production assistant on a talk show, not The View, but similar format, and I saw firsthand how segments were constructed to create artificial drama. There were actual meetings where producers would say things like, "We need more conflict here," or "This needs to go viral." Later, when I was invited as a guest on a different talk show to discuss one of my videos that had gone viral, I experienced the other side being set up as the controversial voice, with questions clearly designed to make me look foolish rather than to explore the topic. These experiences shaped my perspective on media and how I approach my own content creation. I believe audiences deserve better than manufactured outrage and orchestrated gotcha moments. What I find most disappointing about The View is that with its platform and resources, it could be fostering genuinely enlightening conversations. Instead, it seems content to chase ratings through conflict and controversy.
If Democrats really want to die on the hill of bringing back plane loads of criminal, illegal alien gang
But you haven't
members,
proven that they're criminals.
please,
That's the problem.
be my guest.
Honestly, look, I will be the first one to say if there is a criminal, if there's a gang member in this country someone who has committed any crime, big or small, get him out. Sure, I'll absolutely concede that. We don't need criminals in this country. But if you're talking about somebody who you don't know because you haven't afforded them due process, then you can't just make that claim.
But the fact remains, President Trump is not only securing our border, but he is deporting criminal, illegal aliens. And if Democrats want to stand in the way of that, and they want to tell their constituents, hey, vote for us in the midterms, vote for us in 2028, we'll make sure that the criminal aliens come back. Far be it from me to stand in your way.
What's been fascinating for me to watch is the internet's reaction to this whole saga. I've spent hours reading comments and reactions, and it's clear I'm not alone in noticing the tension and awkwardness in subsequent episodes of The View. In my experience creating content, authenticity is something audiences can sense immediately. When hosts are being genuine versus when they're performing outrage or avoiding uncomfortable topics, viewers know the difference. I believe The View remains popular, not because it offers substantive discussion, but because it provides a comfortable reinforcement of certain viewpoints. And honestly, I think there's a place for that in media. I just wish it were more transparent about what it is. This reminds me of something I've noticed in my own content journey. Whenever I've tried to play it safe and just repeat what I think my audience wants to hear, the engagement plummets. The videos that perform best are always the ones where I'm most authentic, even when I'm expressing an unpopular opinion. There was this one video I made last year where I took a stance that I knew would be controversial with my regular viewers. I was terrified to post it, but it ended up being one of my most engaged videos ever. Why? Because people respect authenticity, even when they disagree with you. And that's what I think is missing from shows like The View. There's this palpable sense that the hosts are performing rather than conversing. I can practically see the mental calculations happening. Is this the right thing to say? Will this please our audience? Will this align with our brand? That's not conversation, that's marketing. And viewers can tell the difference even if they keep watching anyway.
I have a question of my own. Do you lock your doors at home? At your residence, do you have a lock on your door? Do you use that lock?
I do, yeah, I do.
Do you have an alarm?
And why is that? I mean, you lock your door because you want to know who's coming into your home. It's not because you hate the people outside, it's because you love the people inside. Well, that's what needs to be done with the United States of America. That's why we have a border. We have a right to know who's coming into our country and why. That's what keeps us safe.
Let me be candid. What bothers me most about The View isn't the political leaning. It's what I perceive as a lack of intellectual curiosity. I value conversation that challenges my thinking, and from what I've observed, The View rarely aims to challenge its core audience's assumptions. In contrast, what I respect about both Kelly and Maher is their willingness to engage with ideas they disagree with. They may dismiss those ideas ultimately, but at least they engage with them first. From my perspective, this is the fundamental difference in approaches. One treats disagreement as an opportunity for discussion, the other often treats it as a threat to be neutralized. As someone who creates content myself, I always try to fall into the first category, though I don't always succeed. I'll never forget an episode where a guest on The View tried to introduce an alternative perspective on a topic the hosts had strong feelings about. What I witnessed wasn't a discussion, it was more like an ambush. 4 hosts talking over one guest, not to engage with the idea, but to shut it down. I actually felt uncomfortable watching it, even though I personally disagreed with the guest's position. Compare that to Bill Maher's show, where I've seen him have lengthy, respectful conversations with people whose views he fundamentally opposes. What stands out to me isn't that he agrees with them, he usually doesn't, but that he's genuinely interested in understanding their perspective. I try to remind myself of this contrast whenever I'm creating content. Do I want to perform certainty for an audience that already agrees with me? Or do I want to model genuine curiosity and intellectual humility? On my best days, I hope I'm doing the latter. On my worst days, well, let's just say I'm still working on it.
But what I would like to point out is that there is no correlation between undocumented people and a rise in crime. That's statistically accurate. Immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, are less likely to commit crimes in the United States. So this notion somehow that it's about national security, I think is just false.
To wrap this up, I want to share what I think is the most important takeaway from this whole situation. In my view, this isn't just about The View versus Kelly and Maher. It's about our media landscape as a whole. I believe we've created a system that rewards strong reactions over thoughtful responses, certainty over curiosity, and confirmation over conversation. And honestly, I struggle with this myself sometimes. What I find most ironic about The View's brand is that it claims to champion women's voices, while often silencing women who don't fit a particular mold. I think of the past hosts who've left or been pushed out, Meghan McCain, Candace Cameron Bure, and others who deviated from the expected script. In my opinion, true empowerment isn't about agreement. It's about respect despite disagreement. And that's something I think is sorely missing, not just from The View, but from much of our public discourse. Let me share something personal with you all. I grew up in a household where dinner table debates were the norm. My parents had completely different political views, yet they modeled something that's increasingly rare today: the ability to disagree fiercely while still deeply respecting each other. That experience shaped me profoundly, and is probably why I'm so frustrated by shows that claim to value diverse perspectives but actually enforce conformity. I believe we're at a critical juncture in our media ecosystem. The easy path is to continue down this road of echo chambers and performative outrage. But the path I hope we take, the one I'm trying to walk with this channel, is to rebuild spaces where genuine intellectual exchange can happen, where we can disagree without demonizing each other, where we can be surprised by a new perspective rather than threatened by it. That's why I think this Kelly Maher versus The View situation matters more than just media gossip. It's a microcosm of a much larger cultural problem that affects all of us. And if we want better discourse, we need to demand it, with our viewership, our engagement, and our attention. So what do you think? Do you agree with Kelly and Maher's assessment, or do you see value in The View's approach that I'm missing? Let me know in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your perspectives, especially if they differ from mine. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like and subscribe for more content where I share my unfiltered thoughts on media, politics, and culture. Until next time, thanks for watching.